Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the stories in some of our favorite games and ask the tough questions to figure out what is right and what is wrong. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're reconnecting with an old acquaintance, heading out to the desert, and scoring some cash for the next FIB job in Grand Theft Auto 5. In case you missed any of the previous episodes in the Philosophy and Ethics series, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down this and other games, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. After dressing up as a cop for the first job that Devin Weston asked him to do, Trevor finds himself partnering with Franklin and working alongside the LSPD for the next vehicle theft, as they're using facial recognition software and searching for a guy who is ready and waiting for them to show up. To be fair, the software doesn't really work to recognize faces so much as it apparently reads a chip in people's licenses to identify who they are. At least according to the guy flying the chopper that Trevor is in. But the end result winds up being the same for our purposes, and it gets us started early with an ethical conundrum that's been in the news and popular media for years. The idea that a company or the government could identify individuals using only a camera and some software from a distance and without their knowledge or consent is terrifying to say the least. The theory behind this kind of technology, something that is very real and used in our modern world, is that it can be used to quickly identify threats to the populace so that they can be detained quicker or eliminated before hurting anyone. For instance, if someone was out there doing harm in one way or another, having cameras that could find them at a moment's notice could limit the harm they could do by letting authorities know where to round them up. In practice, giving that kind of power to the people in charge of making laws and running society at large is a huge risk to the personal freedoms that we all expect to enjoy. As a recent example, federal agents have been using the same kind of technology to track and identify protesters and other individuals in cities like Minneapolis, Minnesota, and elsewhere. Combined with license plate readers, connections to social media sites, and tracking data from apps on people's phones, authorities are able to track the movement and location of anyone they want to target at any time. What this means, in essence, is that if you say or do anything they don't like, they can track you down and arrest you at any time, and you wouldn't even know it was coming. Surveillance like this isn't really something new. It's just become easier with modern tech. And it's a tool that's been used at times to control populations and make them afraid to speak out. Going back and looking at someplace like Germany in the 1930s and 1940s, we can see human-run surveillance in the form of informants that would turn in their neighbors and family to authorities for even hinting at opposing the regime in charge. This made it very difficult to organize any kind of resistance from within, as people could never really know who could be trusted and who was out to get them. And when having this discussion, we always come back to the same thing because of the risk versus reward proposition of saving lives over giving up personal freedoms. Many proponents of the tech and surveillance methods will argue that the cost of giving up their right to privacy is worth it if lives are saved in the process. But is that truly the case? As with everything, the answer really comes down to where your priorities lie. If you hold privacy in high regard and value having the ability to hold opinions that go against those in power, then you're likely against the kind of surveillance technology and practices that become pervasive in more authoritarian systems. On the other hand, if you're worried and in fear for your life from potential threats that could be mitigated using the technology, then you're likely to support it. And that right there is the key: fear. Companies and governments that encourage using technology and spy networks to monitor average people typically promote it as a way to stop threats. Threats that they drum up as a major problem in society. They'll sell the danger of something and then make it seem like a bigger risk than it is, so that they can then turn around and sell the solution. Whenever you're looking into issues like this, it's important to realize that fear is an emotional response, and it takes less effort than digging into and understanding the actual threat posed by a specific issue. Even when presented with the facts, it can be really hard to overcome the fear response, and it usually takes a constant effort to remind yourself that the fear is overblown. For instance, following the attacks of September 11, 2001 on the World Trade Centers in New York and the Pentagon, people became convinced that they could be the next to die in a terrorist attack, even when the threat of something happening to them personally was near zero. It was a constant fear for many in America and even around the world, but the reality was that any individual person was more likely to be eaten by a shark or hit by lightning than to be killed in a terrorist attack on any given day. That fact was lost in the noise of panic, and even when it was pointed out, many people still couldn't overcome the fear. Looking at something more mundane, you are more likely to die in a car crash than a plane crash, and yet more people are afraid of flying than getting into a car. And that's something that's really important to understand when it comes to fear and how it affects us, because fear isn't rational and it makes us do some crazy things. It'll make us avoid stepping on cracks on a sidewalk, or to not go swimming right after eating, or even to buy in when politicians and executives tell us that the policies they want to implement to monitor the populace are in our best interest. Getting back into the game, we can catch back up with Trevor and Franklin as they manage to locate the car that Devon's asked them to steal, and Franklin delivers it to Devon's private hangar at the Los Santos International Airport. Just like the first delivery, this one goes unpaid, and things won't get much better from there for any of our heroes. Even though Franklin and Trevor have been stiffed by Devon Weston, Michael is getting something out of the relationship as he gets the chance to meet an iconic, has-been director and movie producer known as Solomon Richards. Solomon was successful enough in his career to wind up owning a movie studio in his golden years, but he isn't doing so well in the modern era, and the studio is under threat of being closed down by Devon Weston, even as there is a movie actively being produced. Though, even that has its problems. Michael's first task for Solomon is to retrieve one of the actors and the director for the movie, as they've both gone AWOL and are refusing to work. There isn't a whole lot to say here overall, as Hollywood has a million problems like this, I'm sure, but I will point out after the past few years that this mission might be very different if it were set in 2026 instead of 2013, as Michael would probably be tasked with kidnapping someone to help program AI actors or something like that, following the strikes that we've seen over that debacle in recent years. To be honest, it can be kind of hard to feel sorry for the big actors and famous directors who wind up being divas more often than not, and I would have really been interested in seeing how Rockstar's writers handled AI in Hollywood because of that. In reality, the problems with AI in that particular industry are more focused around the people who actually make the movies work, and there is a very real threat of artists and writers losing their jobs thanks to the tech. But we won't get too into that here, since we kind of already touched on it in the Detroit Become Human series, and since it all kind of happened after GTA's timeline. After handling that, Michael gets a call from Martin Madrazzo, who says the rebuild of his house is going fine, but that he also has more work for Michael and Franklin. Madrazzo seems like someone that you wouldn't really want to cross, at least not from what we know about his mob-like ways. And while Michael is willing to put himself on the line for the crime lord, he doesn't want to get Franklin any more involved than he already was, and he makes the horrible mistake of pairing up with Trevor for this outing. At first glance, it doesn't seem like too bad of an idea. Trevor is crazy enough to do just about anything, and even he is likely smart enough not to cross Madrazzo. At least Michael was hoping that was the case. The trouble starts as soon as the door of Madrazzo's house is opened. An older woman greets them, and it's clear right away that Trevor is smitten by her. That might sound crazy on the surface, but he really does seem to be in love at first sight. His whole demeanor changes, and he almost seems unnaturally speechless. You might be forgiven for thinking that she is some kind of maid or servant, but it turns out her name is Patricia, and she is Martin Madrazzo's wife. He treats her like crap and orders her around, telling her to go and get drinks for the group, and all of that probably just plays into what happens next. Madrazzo has a job for the pair that involves shooting down a plane and recovering some evidence that his cousin has against him. The whole thing involves a laundry list of crimes from witness and evidence tampering to murder and conspiracy, but the more interesting bit is when Trevor calls Michael as they're on their way to do the job to say that he understood why Michael chose to bring him along. He seems to think that they were casing Madrazzo's house for valuables, and he backs that up by pointing out how the only way the man could have landed a wife like Patricia was by being a rich asshole. And I'm sure you know where this is going. Or perhaps like Michael, you have no idea because most people would probably just see the interaction with Madrazzo as nothing more than doing a job for a guy. Most people would likely see the man as a has-been crime lord who treats other people like crap and isn't really worth the time of day that Michael seems to be giving him. Most people aren't Trevor Phillips. Michael shoots down the plane and Trevor recovers the documents before heading back to deliver them to Madrazzo. After disposing of the van and gun that he used to down the aircraft, Michael starts making his way to the house as well, but he doesn't make it very far before a call from Trevor redirects him to an empty lot near a place called Stoner Cement Works. He insists that he didn't do anything Michael wouldn't have done, but this is Trevor that we're talking about. When he finally arrives, Michael's first thought is that Trevor killed the Mexican drug lord. But the reality is so much worse, and I can't even watch the scene without laughing every time.
I asked for a fair day's pay after a fair day's work. Then he kind of got a little angry, so I admit, I kind of got a little angry.
Did you kill him?
What kind of fucking animal do you take me for? No, I didn't kill him.
Oh, fuck.
But I did kidnap his wife.
Oh, no!
So Michael and Trevor have to lie low for a bit. But Franklin still has some cars to steal for Devin Weston. One of those cars, coincidentally, is located at Richards Majestic, the studio owned by Solomon Richards, and this whole thing just keeps getting crazier as we go. That car in particular is one of the more fun vehicles to drive, as it includes things like spike strips that you can drop to lose the cops, and an ejector seat that comes in handy for kicking out unwanted passengers. Otherwise, the mission itself is only really noteworthy for the call that Franklin makes afterward when he can't find Michael anywhere. It turns out the pair of aging criminals have fled to the desert to hide out at Trevor's house in Sandy Shores, meaning Trevor gets to go back to work as the CEO of his company as he tries to decide what to do with his new hostage. But Mrs. Madrazzo will have to wait, as the first order of business involves attempting to steal a plane full of weapons from Merriweather, and it would seem that we're right back into the action movie way of life that Trevor knows and loves. The mission itself doesn't really give us much to focus on, as it's a simple setup that involves flying a smaller plane into the open cargo hold of a larger plane and then abandoning that larger plane as it crashes into a lake. You know, typical Friday Night with the Boys stuff. What I want to hone in on here, though, is the relationship between Trevor and Ron, because it's actually kind of an interesting insight into both of them. Trevor seems to treat Ron kind of poorly on the surface, yelling at him and ordering him around. And Ron seems very subservient, being willing to do whatever Trevor tells him out of some kind of fear or maybe some weirdly aligned loyalty. The whole thing seems really odd, and you might wonder what exactly Ron is getting out of the whole thing. It seems that the relationship, and partnership in general, leans heavily in Trevor's favor, and that Ron takes a lot of unnecessary abuse when he might be better off ending the friendship and partnership. So why does he stick around? I wish there was a simple answer here, something I could point to that makes sense. But the reality is that relationships like this, especially outside of a romantic context, are incredibly complicated. The simple answer is that we're just overthinking it, and that Ron actually likes Trevor, despite his flaws, because he values Trevor's loyalty to his friends or some other aspect that we just don't see in their normal interactions. We don't know the ins and outs of every interaction they have. We don't know what kinds of things they've been through that led them to where they are, and we don't know who Ron really is deep down and what he's okay with. It could be that he's fine with everything that goes on and would be willing to walk away from Trevor if he crossed some specific line. Perhaps what we see as abusive by our own standards is something that Ron just ignores and takes in stride because he actually likes Trevor. Getting a little more complicated and nuanced, it's possible that Trevor's actions toward Ron fulfill some kind of need or psychological desire he has based on some unresolved childhood trauma. Maybe he's in need of some therapy or counseling that would expose what is typically seen as an unhealthy relationship. Or maybe he really isn't comfortable with how Trevor acts and treats him, but he feels like he doesn't have any other options or a way to get out. Perhaps in some way, some form of Stockholm Syndrome has him trapped in a situation that he really wants to escape. While we can't technically know for sure what the truth here is, the point I'm trying to get at is that these kind of situations are never simple, and while we can come up with all the reasoning and explanations that we want to from the outside looking in, what's even more important is knowing our own lines and being able to recognize when we're Ron in this kind of situation. Many people in abusive relationships and friendships don't even recognize what's happening, and they don't see any problem. Some of them might be willing to accept whatever they're going through for one reason or another. Some might be living in denial of the situation, and others might just not know that they even have the option to get out because they've been told or shown what happens when they do. We talked a little bit about this in Kara's story in Detroit Become Human. But it doesn't just apply to romantic or opposite-sex relationships, as platonic friendships can be abusive as well. It's important to take stock of the people that you call friends from time to time and know the signs that they aren't really someone you should be around, and to take action to end the friendship if you aren't comfortable around them. One of the things that is easiest to forget in our lives is that we have the ability in most situations to choose who we involve in our personal lives. If there is someone in your life that is toxic and who you don't want to be around, you can make the choice to drop them completely. That's not always easy and can sometimes mean losing something in the process, but in the long run, it's better for your mental health to cut out those who bring you down. In the case of Ron and Trevor, we'll assume for now that Ron likes Trevor for who he is, despite his attitude and flaws. And as Trevor escapes his brush with the military and Merryweather, we'll shift our focus to a small town on the north side of the map called Paleto Bay. Just when Michael, Trevor, and Franklin think they've done all they needed to for the FIB, agents Haynes and Norton show up to tell them that they will once again be patriotically serving their country to take down terrorists. This time, they need to come up with several $1 million to fund the operation, and it's up to them how that task is accomplished. Thankfully, Michael remembers Lester saying something about a bank in the sticks that they could hit if they wanted some cash, and soon he and Trevor are on their way to meet him in Paleto Bay. The bank they're targeting is a small one, but according to Trevor, it holds millions of dollars that have been extorted from local weed farmers, whorehouses, and meth kitchens, and while it won't be easy, it will be lucrative. And let's talk about that for just a minute, because the idea of crooked, small-town cops and officials extorting money from illegal activities is the pinnacle of the American way of life. Joking aside, there really has been a problem in small towns, specifically with corruption, for a long time. A large chunk of the problems fall on the fact that many small towns don't have the money or capability to fight corruption when it springs up. They simply lack the resources of bigger cities and don't really have the oversight that comes with larger populations and more tax revenue. Often, these small-town governments and police departments are run by locals who have grown up in the community and can get away with more because they are well connected with the residents who might otherwise call them out. Maybe they share some of the benefits their position grants them with their friends, or maybe people aren't willing to call out someone they grew up with as being corrupt. Either way, something like the local police in Paleto Bay extorting money from people partaking in activities that would otherwise be illegal isn't really out of the realm of possibility in the real world. But then that raises the question: if they obtained it illegally, what makes it wrong for Michael, Trevor, and Franklin to steal it? This is where we get into some of the more gray areas when it comes to morality and ethics, because while stealing could be considered wrong morally most of the time, that's not always the case. As we've discussed in other episodes, stealing food, for instance, to feed a starving population could be considered the right thing to do morally, even if it is illegal. Obviously, our little group of misfits here isn't planning to rob the bank to feed the hungry, but what if the job they're doing for the FIB actually does thwart an IAA plot to set off a device that would kill large numbers of people? Wouldn't stealing the money from crooked cops to fund a plan that saves lives be the moral option here? Legally, they would still be in the wrong for robbing the bank, but the crooked cops and officials storing the illicit funds would get in trouble as well if that information were to come out. And, if we're being completely honest and thorough here, it is worth pointing out that the FIB could actually take the money themselves with no shots fired using the idea of asset forfeiture that we talked about a couple of episodes ago. They could walk into the bank with a warrant based on whatever information they have on the corrupt officials and seize the money that is supposedly part of the extortion ring, and then use that money to fund their operation against the IAA. They could even look like heroes in the act as they bring down the corrupt local officials. And, knowing how some of these agencies are, they could even stretch the truth to say that they stopped some bigger plot in the process. That wouldn't be a complete lie, strictly speaking, as they are using the money to stop the IAA's plot, though it is almost as ethically dubious as asset forfeiture is. There is a risk in going that route that they could draw some unwanted attention to themselves, but having Michael, Trevor, and Franklin rob the bank is even riskier, as any or all of them could be killed in the process, or they could be captured and turn on their FIB handlers. That last point is something that hasn't seemed to cross the minds of Haynes or Norton just yet, but perhaps they'll figure it out at some point down the road, as it's kind of a big problem that will need to be addressed at some point. Getting back to the job at hand, the only real setup after casing the place is to grab some military hardware, which I wound up having to do twice thanks to a power outage. Save often, kids. And after a short ride in a van that I'm pretty sure had free candy written on the side, the crew was able to carry out their task and walk away with a cool $8 million. Well, actually, it was a little less than $2 million because the FIB needed their cut for purchasing equipment. But I'm sure that sacrifice will be worth it in the end. Right? The actual job will have to wait until next week, however, as our handlers need time to get the equipment that we need to carry it out. Believe it or not, breaking into an IAA facility and stealing what is likely either a dangerous weapon or shaving cream is the least of the problems that we'll be taking on in that video, as 2 members of our crew wind up taking a little trip that doesn't end so well for one of them. Between now and then, make sure you're subscribed to Lost in Games so you don't miss any of the great breakdowns that I've got coming up. We're in the home stretch for GTA in the Philosophy and Ethics series, and I've got another great game on deck as we move into March. You're also going to want to keep up with my other series, Friend or Foe, as we break down characters like Michael, Franklin, and Trevor, among others. If you want to help keep the channel going while getting some cool perks along the way, you can sign up for channel memberships here on YouTube, become a patron over on Patreon, or join the membership program I have on my website, where I have even more awesome stuff free for the whole world to see. That's all I've got for this one. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.